Hey, it's Irreverent Aegis here, and in this video I'm going to be going through my favorite tank build of all time, the Omni Aegis build, or as I like to really call it, the Make Everyone a Tank tank. This build works best on Warden tanks, however you can use it on any type of tank. You'll just need to bring a different set, or you'll want to have a Warden in your group. So, with that being said, let's go through the options you have for Make Everyone a Tank. What does it mean to make everyone a tank? Well, we can buff their resistances to tank levels, we can increase their health, we can give them damage shields, we can reduce incoming damage, and we can provide passive healing. We don't need to do all of those, however, the more of these we can do, or the more that we can stack certain ones of these, the better our Make Everyone a Tank build becomes. Warden tanks are particularly well suited to run the Omni Aegis build. Why? Well, they have Expansive Frost Cloak, that's a skill that gives everyone major resolve. We have Polar Wind, which is an unselfish health scaling tank heal, where when you heal yourself, you can also heal any other group member that possibly took a lot of damage. We have Maturation, which is the passive that gives everyone an extra 10% health when they get healed by you, which is very easy to provide. Simply pop a Blood Altar or run anything that provides some group healing passively. And then we have Permafrost, the ultimate that gives everyone major protection. Like I said earlier, you don't need to run a Warden, so why wouldn't you run a Warden? Well, you may not have a Warden tank. That's the most important one. You might play with a Warden healer in your group already who can provide some things that you were going to provide, or you already have a tank that you hunt achievements with and don't want to start over with a new tank. Either way, this build should work with some modifications for you. Next, let's talk about your gearing options. So you can use this sheet as a cheat sheet if you forget what options you do have available to you. So there's two different types of gear that I recommend. There's close range fight gear. These are the fights where the whole team can stack close to the tank for most of the fight. And then there's any range fights. So this doesn't matter if you're together or spread out. So these sets are a little more versatile. You can use them in any type of fight. However, for the close range fights, the close range gear tends to be a little bit more powerful than just using the any range gear. So first, for close range fights, we have Grave Guardian, which is a resistance booster, Imperium, which gives damage shields, Battalion Defender, which heals, Hades, which also heals and gives some other buffs, and Lord Warden for your monster set, which gives resistances. What's really fun about the close range gear is that you can turn fights that are not designed as stack and whack fights into fights where everyone can pretty much stack right on the tank and ignore all of the mechanics, ignore all of the damage going out. Basically standing in stupid because there are going to be so many resistances that you're providing as the tank, so many damage shields, so much healing, whatever. And you can really trivialize a lot of the mechanics in a lot of fights with the close range gear. Some fights, however, you can't do that because there's too much damage, so that's why we'd go with the any range gear. For the any range gear, we have Mighty Glacier. That's if there's no Warden in the group. That's the thing that gives major resolve as a set to everybody. But again, if you have a Warden, you don't need it. Meritorious Service, that's kind of like the ranged Grave Guardian. Automated Defense is another resistance or decreased damage type of set. Ebon to increase health. Bonnie's is a major maim. Shadowrend is going to decrease damage done by enemies. Troll King is going to boost health recovery, and Thorvacoon is going to be an option for reducing damage from everybody. Let's go over the close range gear in more detail, starting with Grave Guardian. The 5-piece for Grave Guardian procs when you block, which is pretty much all the time as a tank. So while you're blocking, you give nearby group members 4,430 physical and spell resistance, which is quite a hefty amount of resistance. Next up, we have Brands of the Imperium. When you take damage, you grant you and your group members within 8 meters a damage shield that absorbs 12,000 plus damage for 6 seconds. This is affected by your champion points, whether you want to put some into increased damage shield effectiveness or not. So that number can fluctuate. However, either way, even at a base level without any champion points, this damage shield is still pretty strong. The Battalion Defender set is particularly useful on a Warden tank because of that passive you get that gives everyone minor toughness when you heal them. So the 5-piece for Battalion Defender, after successfully blocking, heal yourself or a group member within 15 meters of you for 2,821 health. This can happen every 1 second. So you put this on, you're blocking, everyone stacks around you, and as they take damage, this is going to prioritize the person that needs healing the most, so they're going to get the heal, and then if you haven't already procced minor toughness on them, now you will, just simply using this set and blocking, which you are already doing. This does pair pretty well with Grave Guardian. Hades is a light armor set that was probably originally intended to be worn on a healer. However, whenever I see a healer in 4-man content or a trial setting wearing Hades, unironically, I always kind of laugh to myself, as there are a lot better options for healers to be wearing in those settings. However, for the theme of making everyone a tank, this actually checks a few boxes. So what it does is, when you heal yourself or an ally with an ability, you gain a warming aura for 10 seconds, and the aura heals every second for over 1,000, and also reduces the cost of sprint, block, and roll dodge for everyone in that aura as well. And it can occur once every 12 seconds. So you see you get that passive heal, but then you also get that reduced cost of, in particular, block and roll dodge, which you can kind of justify that as an increased damage mitigation, because you can block a little bit longer, you can roll dodge attacks a little bit better. So again, this does fit the make everyone a tank theme, and if you do want to test this out, you have to go with weapons and jewelry, because again, it is a light armor set. The last set we're going to talk about for the close range fights is the monster set, Lord Warden. When you take damage, you have a 50% chance to summon a shadow orb for 10 seconds. That increases the physical and spell resistance of you and your group members within 8 meters by 3,069. This effect can occur once every 10 seconds. So again, with the range being about 8 meters, this does pair really well with Grave Guardian, which also has a range about the size of the Lord Warden set, and again, that goes really well with Imperium, which also has about the same range, or Battalion Defender, which again has about the same range. So you see you have plenty of options here. I like to run Lord Warden with the Warden and with Grave Guardian, because you end up being able to buff your group resistances by about 13,000. For your other set, if you wanted to run Meritorious Service, you'd get over 16,000 resistances for the entire group, which is quite a lot when you add it to the resistances that they have. So you can see this becomes a pretty powerful build when you pair certain sets. So anyway, with that being said, let's move on to some of the other sets that you can wear for any situation, not just the close range fights. First up, we have Mighty Glacier. If you have a Warden tank or regularly run with a Warden healer, you will not need to have Mighty Glacier, as the skill Frost Cloak provides essentially the same benefit. So what does it do? When you activate a snare or immobilize, or hit a target with a snare or immobilize, you give your entire group Major Resolve for 15 seconds, increasing their physical and spell resistance by 5,280. It has a cooldown of 10 seconds, so what you realize is that you can have 100% uptime on this very easily. Necromancer tanks do really well with Mighty Glacier, as they have an ability, Ghostly Embrace, or its other morph that you can put on your bar instead of something like Beckoning Armor. That way, you can run Ghostly Embrace, give your entire group Major Resolve, but also provide that snare or immobilize from the ability, and a maim for anything that it hits, so it works really well. If you're not on a Necromancer, you have the option from the Sword and Board line, Deep Slash. That's the other morph to Heroic Slash, which most people use. So Deep Slash, the less used one, works really well with this, because not only is it an AOE maim, but it also is a snare. So now you can slot that on your bar instead of what gives you Major Resolve. Cast that, maim everything, snare a bunch of things, and give your entire group Major Resolve. Although Meritorious Service got nerfed recently, having a buff that went from 2 minutes to only 20 seconds, it's still pretty useful. When you cast a support ability, Purge being the most likely one that you will be casting in PvE content, you increase the physical and spell resistance of yourself and up to 5 group members within 10 meters by 3,417 for 20 seconds. So this is very similar to Grave Guardian, except it provides a little less of a buff. You don't need to block the entire time, as this lasts for 20 seconds upon a single cast, and the range is a little bigger. Automated Defense is a really fun set to mess around with as an option for this build, especially since it recently got buffed. When you use an ultimate ability, you and the closest 5 group members within 28 meters of you gain Major Aegis for 1 second per 14 ultimate spent, reducing your damage taken from dungeon, trial, and arena monsters by 15%. If you just happen to use the Warden ultimate that gives everyone major protection, this pairs very nicely, as you can give major protection and Major Aegis at the same time, significantly reducing all incoming damage, in addition to the damage reduction you're getting from your other sets. So this is a really cool set to mess around with for this build. Ebon is a set that many people are very familiar with already. It tends to work really well with Wardens, as not only are you increasing the max health of everyone by 1,000 from Ebon, but you also give everyone minor toughness, and yes, minor toughness does stack with anything else that gives you health. So this set does tend to work very well on Wardens, and it does provide a really large range for the buff. Bonnies is a set that gives you a source of Major Maim, so when you taunt a nearby enemy, you tether to them for 5 seconds, and while tethered, you apply that Major Maim, reducing their damage done. The cooldown is 14 seconds, which honestly isn't too bad. For monster set options, let's start with Shadowrend. When you take damage, you have a 15% chance to summon a Shadowy Clanfear for 15 seconds. The Clanfear does a little bit of magic damage, but it also, and most importantly, reduces the target's damage done by 5% for 2 seconds. Since it attacks pretty much every 2 seconds, this 5% is going to be there the entire time the Clanfear is up. So this is a nice unnamed maim to reduce total damage. Another interesting monster set for this build is Troll King, which does fit the theme of this build very well, even though Troll King itself isn't the strongest monster set and really isn't used a whole lot in PvE anymore. Still, it's fun to play around with it in certain settings with this build. So when you heal yourself or an ally, if they are still below 50% health, their health recovery is increased by 893 for 10 seconds. So all you really need to do here to proc this is pop a Blood Altar. You put out the Blood Altar and it's going to provide a minor lifesteal. So the minor lifesteal is just a small 600 health heal. So if one of your allies does tend to take a bit of damage all at once, that minor lifesteal is going to heal them, but it probably won't heal them above 50% health, so they'll get the Troll King buff from it. So again, an interesting choice as a monster set for Make Everyone a Tank. The final monster helm I want to discuss for any range fights for the Make Everyone a Tank build is Thorvacoon. When you take damage from a nearby enemy, you summon a growing pool of bile for 8 seconds. This is going to deal some damage, but it's also going to apply minor maim to any enemy in the area, reducing all of the enemy's damage done, and it can occur every 16 seconds. This fits the theme because it does provide maim to all of the enemies. So if you want a little bit of slot efficiency and don't want to slot your own maim, this is an option for you. Now that we're done talking about the different sets that you have a choice of, let's talk about the skills that you should be using. These are general skills, so this is a general bar setup no matter what type of tank you are. So on the front bar, I recommend a tank heal, your taunt, a source of major resolve for yourself or the group, a flex spot for purge, especially if you're running meritorious service, you'll need purge, a group damage shield, or a source of maim, and then a flex spot 2 with your choice of pretty much whatever the fight calls for in your opinion, and then some ultimates, whether it's Warhorn, Barrier, to fit the theme of course, or a class ability. On the back bar, I like to run a tank heal on the back bar as well as the front bar. The range taunt, Blood Altar, especially if you're a Warden, Wall of Elements with Hopefully you have the weakening enchant to mitigate some extra damage, or obviously Crusher. It just depends. Weakening fits the theme, Crusher prevents more damage. A chain or pull ability, or if you're in a boss fight where you don't need to chain or pull anything, this is also a flex spot, and then your second ultimate. So again, Warhorn, Barrier, or a class ability. So now we're going to take a look at my build that I like to use on my Warden tank, so I can show you some specific skills for a Warden using this Omni Aegis or make everyone a tank build. Polar Wind is an excellent tank level heal that scales with max health. Not only does it heal you for a giant burst, but it also heals a nearby ally who may need the heal as well. Next, I have a flex spot, so I choose to use Growing Swarm on occasion for a little bit extra damage, as it does provide minor vulnerability to any target that I hit with it. It really has nothing to do with the theme. However, for this flex spot, I do have some options depending on the fight, so oftentimes I go with Growing Swarm. In the next bar slot, I have the bland, boring, old, reliable taunt from the Sword and Board skill line. You can use Ransack or Pierce Armor, of course. After that, I am running Efficient Purge in my other flex spot. I'm mostly running Efficient Purge because I probably have equipped Meritorious Service right now. So with Meritorious Service, I do need to be able to proc it with a support ability. So Efficient Purge is on my bar, taking up that other slot. Expansive Frostcloak takes my 5th spot, as this is the skill that provides not only me with Major Resolve, but the entire group with Major Resolve. So this skill is a staple to the Make Everyone a tank build for the Warden. For my first ultimate, I like to run Permafrost, which not only does a fair amount of damage and provides that chilled status effect and the 70% snare, but you and your nearby allies also gain major protection for the entire duration of this. So that major protection is awesome for this build, as again we want to reduce incoming damage and increase survivability. So I like to slot this on my front bar. This, again, as I mentioned earlier before, works really well if you are wearing automated defense, because then you can give major protection along with major Aegis at the same time. On to the back bar, I again have Polar Wind, as this is my personal preference to have a tank heal on both bars. More importantly, for the second slot, I do run Overflowing Altar. Sacrifice your life essence to conjure a fountain of blood to apply minor lifesteal to enemies, healing you and your allies every second while damaging them, and then allies can activate the Blood Feast synergy, healing for 65% of their max health. So running this is really good on a Warden tank, again, because you're going to provide a minor toughness for the entire group, increasing their health by 10%, but also if you happen to be wearing the Troll King Monster Helm, this skill is definitely the way to go. The next two skills are our Range Taunt and our Wall of Elements. Wall of Elements, when paired with a staff that is infused and has a weakening or crusher enchant, is ideal, as you can keep 100% uptime on whatever enchantment you have and make it stronger. Of course, fitting the theme is the weakening enchant, but a lot of people will still choose to run crusher for the extra damage. But as long as you recast that Wall of Elements every 14 seconds, you should keep that uptime with your infused bar. For my 5th skill, I choose to use Frozen Retreat, and sometimes I change this out for Silver Leash. Both of these are pull or chain abilities. The Frozen Retreat, of course, is way more fun because allies can use your synergy and teleport to you, which has nothing to do with this build, but it's really cool shenanigans nonetheless. For my back bar ultimate, I use Aggressive Horn, as all tanks should pretty much have access to Aggressive Horn anyway. Most of the time, we're not going to need that major protection from Permafrost, because let's face it, we're buffing the entire group's resistances, healing, and all that stuff anyway with this build, so we probably don't even need the major protection. So Aggressive Horn comes in handy because we can kill things faster. As far as the other options for flex spots on your front bar for a Warden, you have a lot of class skills that you may find useful, such as the one that gives you minor evasion at all times for a little extra survivability, or the one that provides you resources, the Netch, whatever morph you decide to use, or you can even slot some extra healing abilities to provide some more group utility for your entire team. Of course, you also have options that don't come with the Warden, but come with being a tank in general, such as the Bone Surge skill that gives everybody a damage shield when synergized, or something from the Sword and Board skill line that provides a maim. So lots of options for those flex spots, so simply choose them based on what the situation calls for. If you liked this build video, please support my channel by subscribing to it, hitting the like button, leaving a comment below, or, of course, most importantly, sharing this build video with all of your tank friends who desperately are in need of some new ideas, because tanking can get pretty boring if you don't liven things up a bit.